everyone, I am Kim Hughes, and thank you so much for joining me for the Sane Crypto Podcast. It's the first cryptocurrency podcast for baby boomers investing for retirement. You can go to sanecrypto.com/retirement to sign up for my free online training called How a Little Bit of Bitcoin Can Make Your Retirement Savings Go a Lot Further. Today's topic comes from a conversation that I overheard at the gym the other day. And just so you know, I was not eavesdropping. These two women, they were right next to me talking while they were warming up. So I couldn't help but overhear. And here in Aiken, where I live, the largest employer by far is the Savannah River site. During the Cold War, the Savannah River site made the fuel for our nuclear weapons. Locals back then, I guess, called it the bomb plant. I'm not entirely sure what they do today that employs over 10,000 people, but in a small town, that's a big employer. So when you ask someone, that you run into what they do, very often they'll say, oh, I work at the plant. That's what they call it now. Not the bomb plant, the plant. So the one woman was telling the other about her dad, and apparently both these women worked at the plant, as did had her dad. Her dad was older, she said, couldn't work anymore, and it sounded like, even though they have pensions at the plant, because they work for the Department of Energy, right? He wouldn't have gotten his full pension benefit until he worked to 82 because of when he started there, and apparently he'd been forced to retire for health reasons, and he took his Social Security early, which was not nearly enough between the two for him to live on, and it was putting a strain on her and her husband because they were trying to subsidize him while still taking care of their own family and save for their own retirement. And her husband was getting resentful, and they had a big fight, And she's saying, well, what if it was your mom and dad? You'd be doing the same thing. It was horrible. It was a horrible story. And not surprising, because the statistics say that this woman's dad is not alone. Only 31% of seniors 65 and over have $200,000 in their retirement account. And in an Allianz study of over 3,000 baby boomers, 60% of them were more afraid of outliving their savings than of actually dying. More afraid of running out of money than death. Okay, that says a lot. Now, interestingly, when I owned my investment firm and worked directly with near retirees, I was always surprised at how many people really didn't know exactly how much money they needed to save in order to replace their income. Like for me, this is basic, not just me. It's basic financial planning, right? Start with the end in mind. How can you reach a goal if you don't know what the goal is? So, for example, some very simple back of the napkin math, without taking into account all the different specifics of someone's situation, but just using a very simple 4% withdrawal rate in retirement and average inflation, average market returns, average Social Security and tax rates. A couple wanting to replace, let's say, a joint $150,000 a year in salaries would need to have $1.9 million saved to be able to retire today and fund a joint 30-year retirement. Okay? And there are a lot of big ifs baked into that number. I mean, the first is a joint life expectancy of only 30 years. Because did you know that according to the United Nations, there are nearly 500,000 centenarians, which is people age 100 and older in 2015, and which is more than 4 times as many as there were in 1990. And that growth rate is accelerating. That the projections suggest that there are going to be 3.7 million centenarians worldwide in 2050. Like, I can't lay my hands on the source article right this second because I just remembered it. But I know I read something that said centenarians might end up being, or would end up being, I forget. But it was like they were going to be the fastest growing segment of the workforce in some year in the not too distant future. Okay, so this is clearly not your great grandparents' retirement. I can tell you that. Another assumption is that you are healthy. I have my own family horror stories about how my grandmother on my mother's side was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. I think she was like around 72-ish and was fortunate enough to have saved, inherited, whatever, divorced, gotten in divorces, a couple $1 million, but that she had already run through that entire estate, the $2 million to pay for her care before she died. I could go on. There's the sequence of returns problem, which refers to the detrimental effect of taking permanent losses of capital later in a portfolio's life compared to earlier. Saving enough to live well in retirement, which is the goal for all of us, I think, it's hard. And the later you start, the harder it is. In fact, for most of us to get to these sorts of savings numbers requires a 10 to 12% return over our investing lifetimes. And sadly, the U.S. stock market has typically returned more like 8% over long periods of time, and the typical diversified portfolio across stock and bonds somewhat less. So this is a big, big problem for a whole lot of people. And it's one that I have thought about and worked on for over 20 years. I invented an investment method which was designed to produce double-digit cash flow from stocks that helps to solve this problem for near retirees and retirees, which is exactly why crypto assets caught my attention. In his book, Zero to One, easy for me to say, the billionaire founder and investor Peter Thiel talks about the question that he likes to ask when interviewing someone, which is, what important truth do very few people agree with you on? Well, most people believe that crypto assets are too risky for a retirement portfolio. Heck, a lot of them believe that they're just too risky for anybody. But the truth is the opposite. I believe that almost everyone should have a small exposure to Bitcoin, including baby boomers, especially baby boomers, that it is actually crazy not to. And I believe that so strongly, I came out of retirement to start Sane Crypto, to spread that message and help baby boomers do exactly that. So let me explain. Here is what you have to know about Bitcoin if you don't already. The first thing is there is a legitimate range of outcomes, anywhere from Bitcoin going to zero to all the way to Bitcoin replacing gold and offshore banking, giving it a fair value of $1 million or more per Bitcoin, and everywhere in between. And no one knows which it will be. No one. Not Warren Buffett, who says it's rat poison squared, not billionaires who own it in mass quantities. No one. And when I say Bitcoin could go to $1 million, okay, the first time you hear something so seemingly crazy, actually every time I hear it, every time I say it, right, reasonable brains just dismiss that as impossible. But do the research like I have done, and you realize that actually, it is possible. Maybe not likely, definitely not certain, and not next year, but it's within the realm of real possibility. Now, quickly before I go on, I go into these scenarios, for different price targets and and the research behind them in a lot more detail in my free online training than I've got the time to do here. I don't want to leave you hanging. So if that's of interest, it's called How a Little Bit of Bitcoin Can Make Your Retirement Savings Go a Lot Further. I mentioned it at the top of the show. And you can register for that training at sanecrypto.com/retirement. So at the moment, let me just check here. Bitcoin is selling for $7,290. Okay, so that, as of this moment, is your maximum downside risk. That's the very most that you can lose by just owning Bitcoin. Okay? Your upside, on the other hand, from what I just told you, is basically unlimited. Now, all right, forget $1 million, okay? But there are many scenarios where Bitcoin just supplants a reasonable percentage of the physical gold holdings, and you can make a case for it being worth six figures, okay? This is what we call an asymmetric bet, a lopsided upside-downside skew. And these sorts of bets only come along once in a lifetime, at least ones that you and I can participate in, because we typically don't have the chance to be early seed round investors in, unicorns like Facebook or Airbnb, okay? So Bitcoin has this massively skewed upside potential and no way of predicting the outcome. Again, no one knows. Everything everyone says is just a guess. Flip a coin, heads it goes to $1 million, tails it goes to 0. What I have just described to you is a modern day version of what in probability and game theory is known as Pascal's wager. Now, as I read this description of Pascal's wager, when I say the word God, I want you to think the word Bitcoin, and you'll see what I mean. Ready? Okay, here we go. Pascal's wager is an argument in philosophy presented by the 17th century French philosopher, mathematician, and physicist Blaise Pascal about belief in God. The gist of the wager is that, according to Pascal, one cannot come to the knowledge of God's existence through reason alone, so the wise thing to do is to live your life as if God does exist, because such a life has everything to gain and nothing to lose. If we live as though God exists, and he does indeed exist, we have gained heaven. If he doesn't exist, we have lost nothing. If, on the other hand, we live as though God doesn't exist, and he really does exist, we have gained hell and punishment and have lost heaven and bliss. If one weighs the options, clearly the rational choice to live as if God exists is the better of the possible choices. Pascal even suggested that some may not, at the time, have the ability to believe in God. In such a case, one should live as if he had faith anyway. Perhaps living as if one had faith may lead one to actually come to faith. All right, God and religion aside, okay, I think we can all agree Bitcoin going to $1 million would be the financial equivalent of gaining heaven. And being 90 years old, broke, and living under a bridge eating cat food is the financial equivalent of hell. So the question remaining is, how do you structure an investment portfolio to approximate Pascal's wager? What would Pascal's portfolio look like? Such that, in his words, if you lose nothing, but if you win, you gain all. Or said another way, how do we structure our investment so that if the naysayers are right, we don't do irreparable harm to our nest egg, but if the believers are right, we make potentially life-changing money that could catapult us across that retirement finish line? Well, let's take some scenarios. Actually, before we do, let me stipulate a couple of things. First is that I believe, for reasons that will become a little bit more obvious below, that you should not invest more than 2% of your total investable assets in cryptocurrency. Could be less, but not more than 2%. Second, cryptocurrency is not suitable for everyone. Many people, but not everyone, meaning you should only invest risk capital that will not affect your standard of living if it's lost or if it sits idle for long periods of time. Because what we're talking about here is investing in a new asset class, something that you will remain invested in for the rest of your portfolio's life. This is not a short-term investment. This is a permanent investment, just like the stocks and the bonds, commodities, REITs, and other asset classes that you hold today. Okay, so that said, let's take a look at Jill. You may have heard me talk about Jill before. Jill is still working as a school administrator. She has a $500,000 portfolio, which is spread among her 401k, an IRA, 403b, an IRA, and a taxable brokerage account. And she is roughly on track to retire in about 5 years. And so the way I look at this, because for me, job number one for a portfolio is always enough portfolio income that you can do what you want when you want without worrying about how you're going to pay for it. Okay. So it's all about the amount of income that your portfolio can produce. I don't care what the balance is. I only care, how much can I live on? How much can I use to pay bills, right? How much can I pull to pay for unexpected expenses? So just to use a simple rule of thumb, which admittedly I'm not crazy about, but it makes it simple. We'll use the standard 4% withdrawal rate in spite of all of its issues, and it's easy. Okay, so given that 4% withdrawal rate in retirement, the current cash flow potential of Jill's portfolio is $20,000 per year. So let me just back up and make sure you understand how I got to that number. $500,000 portfolio times 4% withdrawal rate is a maximum withdrawal or cash flow potential of $20,000 per year. Okay, anything above that, and she would, risk damaging the portfolio to the point that it couldn't support her. Okay, and of course we assume she also gets Social Security and so forth. All right. Now the assumption, based on my rule from earlier, is that Jill would only invest up to 2% of her total investable assets. So in this case, that's 500,000 times 2%. That would be $10,000. Okay. So let's consider worst case. Jill invests that $10,000 in Bitcoin and loses it all. The income potential, okay, so now our portfolio has gone from 500,000 to 490,000, right? So the income potential has fallen from 20,000 per year to 19,600, a $400 difference per year. Okay? But on the flip side, let's not look at her Bitcoin going to 1 million, or 500,000 or even 100,000. Although again, there are valuation models under which that is not far-fetched. Let's just take the returns of 2017, which were 1,044%. So they happened last year. No guarantee they'll happen this year or ever again, but just to try to show a reasonable upside scenario and what impact it can have, okay? Last year, her gain on her $10,000 investment would have been $124,478. That is what I mean by Pascal's wager. If you're completely wrong, God doesn't exist, and you lose the entire $10,000, your retirement income potential drops by $400. But if you are right, God does exist, and you just got last year's returns, then your portfolio income is now $25,000 a year. That is a 25% raise, not just for life, for life. Do you think that that is meaningful to Jill? You bet your bippy it is. Who wouldn't take that bet? I know I sure am. And contrary to all the people who say Bitcoin is too risky for a retirement portfolio, I sleep very well at night, knowing that my downside risk is capped, right? If I lose everything that I've invested in the crypto asset, right, the impact will be negligible, right? So that allows me to completely ignore the market volatility because it is volatile, right? Goes up and down, what the stock market goes up and down 8% on average a year, Bitcoin can do that in 5 minutes, okay? But you just, you don't even look, right? And because what we're focused on is the bigger play, which is betting a small amount of money for the possibility of a massive return. And for most people whose number one job in their portfolio is paying for their retirement, which is a big, 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 big nut with lots of uncertainty, it just doesn't make sense to turn your back on this as a possible solution. So I hope you found that helpful, and as always, just something for you to consider. If it was, you could do me a great big favor in return, which is number one, to subscribe to this podcast. Just so you know, the iTunes algorithm dings us for people who download the podcast but don't subscribe. And even better, it gives preferential treatment to those who have 5-star reviews, particularly those that have comments and feedback. So if you wouldn't mind going to iTunes and leaving one of those, if you find this podcast useful and helpful, and some say refreshing, I would really appreciate it. My goal is to crack the top 100 list for investing, so that I can get found by more people, and I sure would appreciate it. Not to mention it would be a, little boon for my ego to make the top 100. So if you're not sure how to leave a review for me on iTunes, maybe you're a Spotify or a SoundCloud listener, or you've never left a podcast review before, it's very simple. Just go to sanecrypto.com/podcast, the same place you get the show notes for this episode. But scroll all the way down to the bottom of that page and you will find a link that will take you right there, as well as step-by-step instructions for leaving your review. And if you'd like to learn more about investing in crypto assets for retirement and Pascal's portfolio, I'd encourage you again to register for my free online training, which is called How a Little Bit of Bitcoin Can Make Your Retirement Savings Go a Lot Further. And you can do that again at sanecrypto.com/retirement. And finally, if you have a question about today's topic or anything else, just email me at askkim@sanecrypto.com. I read and answer every email personally, as well as answer some of them here on the show. Everything I say on this show is for educational purposes only. Nothing should be considered investment advice. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. All investments involve risk, so do not, under any circumstances, invest money you can't afford to lose. That's it for me. I'm Kim Hughes, and I will be back next week. Until then, may the crypto gods continue to smile on us all.